All right, let's begin. Welcome. Glad to have you all with us this afternoon. My name is Emily Badix. I am co-director at the San Francisco Disability Cultural Center. We have some access notes before we begin. If you would like more personalized captions from stream text, you can access them at dcc.page/captions. Today's program is a Zoom webinar, so it's like you're watching a TV show with our favorite guests. The DCC team is going to use the chat function to share some crucial access information and links with you. But if you want that conversation and chat space like we have at some of our programs, you can use the Q&A space for that. You can also use that space to ask your questions. Our panelists are planning to leave some time today to answer some audience questions. So whenever something comes to you, you can feel free to drop it in that space. If that space isn't available to you or you have other tech needs, you can also email us at access@disabilityculturalcenter.org. On to our event today. I will say I'm fangirling out a bit to get to introduce Eli Clare and Ellen Samuels. When I was really early on in disability studies about 20 years ago, I was introduced to both of these authors. They had some of the writing that just completely blew things open for me. And 20 years later, they are still writing beautiful, mind-opening stuff that is changing our conversations and pushing all of us in new ways. I am so grateful that Eli and Ellen were up for coming to the DCC to share these new works with us. And I'm just really happy to be here with you. I'm going to pass it to Ellen first to get us started. And thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Emily. I so appreciate you and the DCC hosting us. Um, well, not to speak for Eli, but I'm doing a very slow launch for my book, but this is um, my last launch event for the spring, and I'm just so excited to be hosted here as someone who lived in the Bay Area for a long time. I also want to thank the captioners and the interpreters so much for your work making this event accessible. It's beautifully accessible, and I'd like to add my own access note to invite everyone in whatever space you're in to do whatever makes it more comfortable and accessible and joyful for you, including moving around. I'm certainly going to be changing position. A lot of times I can't sit still for 90 minutes in one position. Stimming, dancing, whatever, um, in engaging in the chat in whatever way you want to. What we're going to do is I'm going to read a short set of poems, and then Eli will read a similar short set, and then we'll do that again. We'll each read a second short set, and then Eli and I will have some conversations with each other and chat a bit, and then we'll open up for Q&A and hear all of what you have to say. So I'm going to start with a poem in the first section of my book, Your Body Should Be a Part of the World, that I wrote a few years ago, really thinking about how chronic illness makes me feel like I'm just constantly failing and apologizing to people for things that I haven't gotten done or haven't gotten done in time or didn't do well enough. And then just how all of us, but especially those of us living with chronic illness, neurodiversity, disabilities, um, are just always in this state of feeling like we're not doing enough. And can we ever stop apologizing and just be enough in ourselves? And this poem is called Yesterday I Apologized. Yesterday, I apologized to the dog for not being able to walk her anymore, to the moss green lake in the dappled light, her nose tender against my palm, sampling fish reek and the wind's news. Yesterday, I apologized to the middle of my middle finger, the years-old pebble under skin, bone knot bunched in memory's string. I said, I'm sorry to the skin's warp and weft, to the nerve strung tight on the knuckles fret. I said, I'm sorry to the skin itself, curtain roughly drawn across the body's pink. I apologized to sacrum and thigh bone, to the hinge unhinging where it used to swing, striding next to the dog on our afternoon walks. Yesterday, I apologized to the nightstand where bottles jostle and crowd with last year's books. I sent my regrets to the rutted bed where I knelt each summer, pulling sorrel and dandelion, snow on the mountain and creeping Charlie, in the ripe dirt smell and welter of heat. Last night, when I lay down on the smooth relief of pillow and sheet, I closed my eyes and apologized to the insides of my eyelids, as if two moths, having settled there, needed to know what would happen next. Close your wings, I said. Stay with me in the moon-wet night. We have done all we can. This next poem is one which proceeds from and lightly touches on the experience of medical trauma. For those of us who interact with the medical world frequently and are vulnerable to it, so often that vulnerability can leave us with bruises, both inside and outside ourselves, that we have to reckon with later. And that's what this poem is about. And it's called After the Procedure. I didn't know I could be broken in places that were already broken, blood tunnels weaving through old bruise. When that doctor put his hands on me, he was not prepared. I was not prepared for how loud my voice could sound. And the rack of bone against bone, the syringe, screw, the counting, all those alphabets I didn't know could be unlearned and written again in an afternoon. And could I be the same person today? Harvesting mince bitter with bare hands, chewing wood sorrel's lemon sweet buds. I don't know how to know myself anymore, how even to see my own skin's ground. I forgot to look in the mirror for days. Still, in the garden I find myself, untangling devil's thorn from among the lilacs, handling each needled stem back to the root. And the angled knife, the shovel, boiling water from the stove. This is how you bury it so it doesn't come back. All afternoon, this long, tired work, the sun, an eye overhead, a lens, white hot. This next poem doesn't really need any introduction. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's called In Answer to Your Question. Yes, I have tried yoga. I have tried going gluten-free. I have exercised every day until my abs rippled like an armadillo's shell. And still, my friend calls me up to say that Pilates makes her feel 10 years younger. Yes, I have tried not eating sugar. I read labels like poetry, ruling out fructose, nectars, crystals, that confectionery of risk. I turned away each forbidden fruit, crunched through bowls of cabbage for breakfast until even a raw banana slice lay a faint music on my tongue. And still my coworker stops me in the hallway to tell me that sex has cured her migraines. Yes, I have tried yoga, have pretzeled my legs into shapes they already knew, balanced, breathed, lain down and shuddered my way back up. I have stood, a crane, reaching to the sky in Tai Chi class. I have gone back to ward off monkeys. I have held the ball of my own faltering, hand-heavy persistence. And still, my family sends me articles about the power of positive thinking. Yes, I've tried that too. And still, I will wake up tomorrow in the body I was given, not trying to be Crane, not pretending I am winged, just making my way down the long hallways of my body's house, stretching my hands into tigers' mouths, rounding my arms to hold the answers you never wanted to hear. This last poem of this set was inspired by or responds to a quotation from our current Health and Human Services Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., in an interview on April 16th, 2025, speaking about disabled children and specifically autistic children. He said, quote, "And these are kids who will never pay taxes. They'll never hold a job. They'll never play baseball. They'll never write a poem. They'll never go out on a date." And this poem is called Disabled 2025. I woke up today useless in my useless bed, where I spend my days looking out windows at the black vans in the street, at the marches and signs, at the line of neighbors in Tennessee who passed water and snacks to the refugee child and father sheltering in their closed car, who made a bridge of bodies between car and house. I woke up today without a job or a date, without even a poem to offer this world in which I survive and pay my taxes. This beautiful, unbearable world I can barely stand to look at anymore. When the time comes, will you remember that I never played baseball? Will you lift me to the window when I can't raise my head? Will you tell the men in vans they have to go through you to get to me? Thank you.
Oh, Ellen. Oh, Ellen. Thank you. This is Eli speaking. Ellen, thank you for all the poems. I can't be happier to be here tonight. So I'm going to read this first set of poems that all come from my book that came out last September, September 25, called Unfurl, Survival, Sorrows, and Dreaming. I describe it as a queer disabled love song to beavers and tremors. And so I'm going to start with a love poem called How to Love for the Long Haul. Remember, love is a muscle the size of our hearts, open hands, wild, open sky. Practice every day. Love fiddleheads, coyotes, white pines. Love red foxes and barn cats. Our own round bellies. Love the first ripe cherry tomato, the last bite of pesto, raucous call of crows, and deep quiet of snow. Love bone and gristle, tendon and nerve, each other's tender hearts. Do not succumb to ownership or jealousy. Love through long rain and tense drought, love in bookstores and kitchens, alleyways and traffic jams at countless protests and pride parades. Love, even when angry, ashamed, broken-hearted, become a sunflower leaning into the sun. And these days, one of the reasons I'm starting with love is that it's one of the things that is going to get us through this overwhelming, devastating, enraging, terrifying time we're in. And that love asks us to take care of our own hearts and take care of each other's hearts. So this next poem is called Heart. And the heads up, it contains some mention of death and the material and social conditions, particularly during early COVID. I wrote this in April and May of 2020, called Heart. Heart of lake of flood level, heart of stone, heart of pine, heart of glacier collapsing, heart of spasm and stem, heart of river no longer reaching its estuary, heart of scientist working to create a vaccine for which the whole world awaits, heart of hummingbird hive, hay barn, heart of octopus and damsel fly, heart of eoners after a 16-hour shift, heart of thunderhead, heart of apple tree, heart of janitor cleaning rooms of the newly dead, heart of queerness, heart of kindness, heart of gender rebellion, heart of falcon nesting atop a skyscraper, heart of raven, heart of tightrope walker at 2 a.m., heart of dance floor disco ball drag queen after one too many whiskey sours, heart of no justice, no peace, heart of snake, mouse, owl, heart of bedrock, heart of treehouse, heart of grief, heart of jet stream, heart of moon, heart of sandhill crane, heart of rumble, heart of rage, heart of hallucination, heart of hardness, heart of slowness, heart of worry, heart of orgasm, heart of gasping for breath, heart of ventilator, heart quivering, heart stumbling, heart beginning to stop, beginning to break, beginning to rise. So when I talk about love in this book, I don't mean the kind of love we might find in a Hallmark card. Actually, the love I'm writing about will never be in a Hallmark card. I'm not just talking about romantic love. I'm not talking just about easy, comfortable love. I'm talking about rough, ragged, fierce love. This next poem is called Love Notes, and it contains a mention of climate chaos, flooding. Love Notes. We may not survive the decade, much less century. Yet, when deluge descends, this time, and this time, and this time, surface erupting in silver fury, we invite each other down to the murky bottom. Fill our ears, throats, bellies with the stories we most need. Swim among sunken trees and drowned rivers. Join the loons. Dive for our next meal. Find love notes buried in the muck. And this last poem in the set for me is, I hope, one of those love notes buried in the muck for all of us, called Your Trembling Hands and Mine. Strangers on the street taunt, stare, turn away. Let us forget our manners, compliance, veneer of politeness. Teach each other to keen and rage, strut and flirt, make them yearn, turn to look again, make them flee, make them remember their own shivering, tremulous laugh. And now I want to turn it back to the fabulous Ellen Samuels.
Thank you so much, Eli. That reading was extraordinary. I was hitting the heart react so many times because it was all I could do since you couldn't see me. But I just want to thank you again. Sharing this reading with you is so meaningful to me. And I hope to all of you, sharing it with you is also really lovely. I repositioned myself, so now I'm trying to. Sorry. Okay. Um, so I should have said that all the poems I'm reading are from my new chapbook of poetry, Your Body Should Be a Part of the World, except the last poem I read in the previous set, Disabled 2025, which I wrote after publishing that book. And in the book, the second section is all poems um, about plant life in my backyard, both plants I've planted and plants that are there naturally. And each poem is named after a particular kind of plant life. So I'm going to read a couple of those now. And the first one is called Tomatillo. Tomatillo. The husk forms first. Yellow flower into globe. Paper lantern, lime fist, so empty your finger dents its cheek. Slowly, rain, dirt, gather into compact moon, ripened stone. Is this how the body outlives its shell? No soul rising to heaven, just the skin's slow upheaval into green. This next poem is dedicated to my friend Sally, who is also the artist who created the art that's on the cover of the book. And so I just wanted to give her a shout out. And this poem is called Plum Tomato. Your body should be mute as this globed fruit in a hollow of leaves, heavy and red. What you wish sometimes when the night draws deep is for someone else to be able to hear you. What you wish sometimes is for anyone else to lay a hand across your back and feel its thrumming. It is either pain or the absence of pain that defines you. You forget sometimes how to tell the difference between stem and root. Your body should be a part of the world, or the world should be a part of your body. You forget sometimes how to tell the difference between pulp and skin, both over so soon, so sweet. And then the last of these plant life poems that I will read is called Eggplant Aubergine. Aubergine being the British English name for eggplant. It's because I don't want to be my mother that I am finally letting her go. It's because the eggplant grows so heavy, I have to twine its stem against this stake. It's because the time to maturity is longer in a wintered climate. I have to buy my seedlings from another house. It's because purple-black absorbs the sun's travel. It grows so fast. It's because the electric scalpel can both unclose and seal the wound. The surgeon can lift all my roundness out, where everyone can see how much I don't want to be my mother, how thick the flesh is under the knife, how hard it tries not to be cut. And so many of the poems in this book have to do with the natural world that surrounds my house, as well as being in my house, where I've been virtually housebound by chronic illness for the last 3.5 years. And there's those rare times I'm able to go outside and interact, just in the simplest of actions like gardening or weeding, or just walking around and looking at the plants. And this is a poem I wrote while I was out there doing one of these every day, yet for me rare activities, pruning. So it's called Pruning the Yew. It's been too long. You fix the clippers onto stem, limb, trunk, gnaw the old wood clean. There's more to be cut all around the yard. Trees you never planted, deadly berries of Solomon's seal, and the neighbor's lilies creeping past the fence. Work enough for a summer of days. But this is the work you are doing today. Steel against skin, listening to news of the war as the yew takes form in the ripe thicket, sharpening all the way to the heart, where a branch the size of a child's leg hangs almost free, ribbon of white against moss-dark trunk. Somehow, still, drawing life through that ragged ligament, still making leaves, still the color of the new grass, the lilies, the poison fruit. There is more to do for this world than to weep for it, but this is the work you are doing today. This next poem, I was so honored that our ancestor Alice Wong included it in her second anthology, Disability Intimacy, as both Alice and I shared the vulnerability and the rage of being high-risk disabled people who face challenges with wearing masks, and so whose lives were drastically affected when the mask mandates of the early days of the pandemic were dropped. And it's called Elegy for a Mask Mandate. For a year, maybe 2, I knew that you loved me. I saw it in your eyes, the windows to the soul, the only part of your face I needed to see to believe. For a season, maybe 2, you went with me everywhere, holding hope like a parasol over our heads. I thought we created a new world, where the sick and the well could be citizens of the same country. I held your disinfected hand at the theater, in the grocery store, places I hadn't gone for years. I knew there would always be the resistors, the ones who since childhood called me queer, crippled, lazy, hysterical. But you muffled them with your hand-sewn cotton, your filter inserts, your N95s. We learned to speak a new vocabulary, to understand what it means to protect each other so we all survive. In my home now, in my lonely bed, I'm still speaking those words to the silent house. My mask protects you, your mask protects me. Okay, and my last poem, the title draws upon the title of a poem by wonderful Crip poetic foremother, Cheryl Marie Wade, whose poem was called I Am Not One of the. And this poem is called To the Doctor Who Said, I Am Not One of the. To the doctor who said, I am not one of the people who don't even look at their feet, who shuffle the dust darkness uncaring, unlistening, ununderstanding their skin's own speech. To the doctor who told me not to worry my heel's numbness could rift to crevasse, who explained I was not one of the kind who forgets how to remember to heal. To that doctor who clasped my naked, fractured foot, tracing its trails and minnow skin, I say, I am she, I am he, I am they who surface the darkness between your words. Claw and fibula, hoof and toe, bunkmates, burrow twins, rage siblings, and sorrow kin, uncaring away together through the 28 bones to find our way home. And now I will turn the mic back over to the brilliant and lovely Eli Clare.
I am loving and have loved for a long time, Ellen, how our work talks to each other, often not in direct ways, but often I feel this conversation, these resonances, these um strings being plucked between your work and mine. I love that. So I'm going to start the second set with this idea from Unfurl about dreaming not as a luxury, but as something really essential right now. That dreaming the world we want to live in is something we need right now. And there's a skill we can teach each other and the skill we need to practice together. This poem is called A Murmuration of Dreams. We slip love notes to each other, folded into the accordion of time. They sleep beneath our skin, galaxies cascading into velvet, dark, human light no longer flooding every crevice. Fireweed piercing brick, Virginia creeper curling round. We dip our brushes into the Milky Way, paint abandoned prisons thick with stars, dreaming ourselves backwards, forwards, into that velvet dark, into that velvet dark waterfall. Dreams flare, love notes creak and and groan ghostly as back songs. They wrap around us, lullabies, diatribes, past and future, howling through our bodies. This next poem takes me into the natural world. You know, Ellen wrote all these poems about plant life. I wrote and wrote and wrote in this book about rocks and rivers and beavers and this idea of humans being porous with the natural world. So this is called If Only. I gladly forgo opposable thumbs, entice fingers into feathers, if only to dart on ruby throated wings. river of dreams, cold and clear. Cast language aside, if only to accept Beaver's invitation, she leading me deep inside her lodge, teaching me to grow a paddle-shaped tail, river of sunlight undammed, surrender my tender human heart if only to share Heron's glee, standing transfixed in knee-deep water, sunrise to sunset, river of songs, river of stardust. If only to burrow into the long, slow time of granite covered with lichen. And this next poem, in some ways, is a counterpoint to Ellen's poem about asking her body for forgiveness. And I love how these are counterpoints there, both contradiction and complementary at the same time. The poem is called Praise, and there's a heads up that contains some details about death caused by injustice. There are no pure details, there are no extended descriptions, but there are these vivid mentions. So it's called praise. Let us praise our canes, braces, catheters, our crutches, prostheses, wheelchairs, our ventilators, air filters, hearing aids, sing ourselves familiar. You who did not survive the denial of a kidney transplant. Our stories strain, wisp, whirl out of us. Stars dusting our lungs, tongues, pillows. You who did not survive health insurance greed, praise our medicine bottles and tinctures, ice packs and insulin pumps, spasms and unrelenting pain. Sing ourselves gnarly. You who did not survive the psych ward, we cook, laugh, lay down to sleep, praise our withered legs, feverish skin, aching heads, sing ourselves essential. You who did not survive COVID and dementia alone in a nursing home, dream a history, a rebellion, a universe of love notes. This too will be evidence, feathers and bones. You who did not survive police custody, praise our broken hearts, sing ourselves cherished. And I want to end with a poem that brings together the natural world and my desire to write polemic. You know, for years, when people have wanted to critique my work and kind of shut me down, they've called my work polemic. And for a lot of years that stung. But more recently, I've embraced that. I write polemic. I write propaganda. I write yeah, I write polemic. So this is one of those pieces of polemic. It's called Let Rebellion Be Our Song. We who live in a nation quivering, sing with the swamps and aquifers. We who consume in unspeakable quantities, sing with the tributaries. We who spew carbon spread asphalt, sing with back eddies and muskrat dens. We, blunted by greed, sing with fish, frogs, salamanders, sing and sing again, branch of river, root of tree, crack and dam. Thank you.
Even though I know these works, I know your book, and you sent these to me beforehand, I was still taking notes,
Mm.
Eli, because so many lines, hearing you, right, hearing you read them aloud would just, I just was sitting here writing, surrender my tender human heart, just that really hit me in my tender human heart, just hearing you say that. And I think polemic is a criticism that suggests that um, language is working on only one level, and your language is always working on many, many levels, right? There's the imagery and the rhyme and the politics all intertwined. There's no separating them. Um, I guess now that I've finished my fangirling section, I guess we could officially move to our conversation section. Um,
Do you want to start? Do you want to ask the first question, or would you like
sure,
me to
sure.
go with
Eli and I have a couple of questions we prepared to kind of um, set off this section, and just to remind everyone, we're going to have a little conversation with each other, and then we're going to open up for the Q&A. I know some people are already putting questions into the Q&A box, which is great, and I just don't want you to feel like confused why we're not getting to those yet. We're going to move to that section in a little while. So one of my questions for you, Eli, um, I went back and reminded myself when we met. We met almost 26 years ago at a Society for Disability Studies conference in Chicago in 2000. And I'm wondering for you, how has the world of disability changed since then in those almost 26 years in broad terms and for you personally? And then how has it stayed the same? And how have these changes and persistences of disabled life um, affected your writing? And how has your writing also shaped them? You've been such an important force in the world of disability.
Yes, thank you for that. This is Eli speaking. Um, I'm going to start thinking about disability in 2000 and then move to the second piece of your Marty Branch question. Um, um, the disability worlds I live in have changed so much. Um, And part of that change started at that conference. Like I had been a big piece of disability rights community for a while at that point, probably a decade. But I had very much felt like I had not found many queer people, and I would often go into the very white, very men-dominated, very heterosexual disability rights spaces in Michigan and be like, these are the queerest spaces. No, excuse me, these are the straightest spaces I'm ever in as a queer person. And it was like, this is not my community. This is straight and male and white in a way that I never experienced other parts of my life. And at that SDS in Chicago, which was my first SDS.
Me too.
I didn't really know what disability studies is. I had just published this book that I did not know would become something read in multiple disability studies classes. And I was like, what is this academic conference? I might have been to one or two academic conferences before then. And and the conference as a whole did not know what to do with my gender bending queer self. But then I walked into this room with you and Corbett O'Toole and Allison Kafer. And then went out to dinner with the three of you and the other folks and started to find queer disabled people like Chicago really marks it's not the first time I sat with queer disabled people, but it really marked the beginning of kind of this full-blown queer and trans disabled community. Some of it's the biggest change in my disability world, the emergence of disability justice, the emergence of queer, BIPOC, disabled, femme people leading this framework of disability justice that has been so important. Like I remember, I don't know, almost 10 years ago, Stacey Park Milburn let me shout out to her wherever she is. I remember Stacey saying in her organizing that she has to remind herself that there are disabled straight people out there, that the rooms she's organizing in aren't entirely disabled queer and trans people. And that marks such a sea change, that it's disabled BIPOC leading DJ is so important. I would say by far that's the biggest change and has meant so much in terms of disability art and culture and disabled people surviving and finding each other in lots and lots of different ways. Um, and so those changes have been brilliant to both watch and be part of and benefit from. On the other hand, so much hasn't changed. I think of your mask elegy to mask mandate poem. For a while, it looked like we might be making weed the big dominant cultural ideas about burden and disposability. In the early pandemic, it was like maybe something is shifting. And I remember conversations from that period of time where we said, if this goes back to the way it used to be, our rage is going to take the roof off the world. And guess what? Guess what? In capitalism, white supremacy, settler colonialism just sucked the world back, ableism just sucked the world back into that disposability culture into eugenics. Those things, I mean, inside disability spaces, we've worked so hard against that of finding out ways of keeping each other alive. Um, and the forces in the world, yeah. So I mean, in a medium-sized nutshell, that's how the last 26 years looks from where I sit. And Where I sit is with a lot of privilege. I have very secure housing, very secure food. I have whiteness, whiteness every friggin' moment. Yeah, yeah. So want to acknowledge all of those pieces and more in terms of influencing how I answer that. Um, Before I move on to the second piece of your question, I want to pause and see whether you have things you want to say about the difference between 2000 and
Mhm.
2026.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, I echo so much of what you said, um, in terms of, you know, how narrow and how white and male and straight, both disability rights work and disability studies was. Um, in 2000, that was my first Society for Disability Studies conference as well. And how much that has changed so dramatically. I mean, I think first we came in and queered it really hard, but it still was so white dominated. And now is, um, the emergence of disability justice, the emergence of, um, Black, Indigenous, and Brown, disability justice work and disability studies work. And I want to be really deliberate here that am I distinguish between disability studies and disability justice, and I want to register my distress, um, at the co-optation of disability justice, the term more than the concept, by disability studies in recent years. Right, disability justice is by definition a grassroots movement, and a movement, as you said, that emerged out of queer and trans, black and brown, um, activists outside the academy. And I think it's really important for those in the academy to be more, uh, intentional and more cautious about claiming that what they're doing is disability justice. Because even with all the, um, huge kind of shift in where I think the important and the exciting work is happening, just like in any other case, the structures of power stay in place, you know, and I mean, I was in the academy for many years and wielded privilege of the academy, and now I'm out of the academy and outside those structures of privilege, but still retain, a lot of it, and white privilege and, um, middle class privilege and all those things. But with some distance from the academy, I can be more critical of it now and of the ways, just looking at who gets the actual disability studies jobs, right? Like, is still going to be people who look a lot like we did in 2000 in a lot of ways. I mean, it's really hard, and that goes to the COVID thing as well. But I also want to sound this like tiny note of hope. I'm filled with rage and grief, 99% of the time, like we all are. But I try to hold on to things like, even that we're doing this virtual event, we would not have been able to do this before the way the world shifted during COVID. I'm like hitting my laptop with, emphasis and then shaking the camera. I'm sorry. Uh, and for me, as someone who's now unable to travel, I mean, that is huge. That is huge. And for other disabled people or people who, for other reasons, can only access virtual events. And, the one thing the horrible capitalist world held on to was remote work. Remote work is a lot more available now than it was before the pandemic. So I try to hold on to these little bits. We did not we didn't turn the world upside down, but we made some cracks in it, you know?
Which reminds me how long and slow this work of changing the world. is its long haul work, and it's one of the things I really believe how art and how culture is part of changing the world, as it's part of sustaining us through this really long haul work. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Um, would now could now be a time for you to ask me one of your questions, and we could
yeah,
just kind of continue the
yeah,
conversation through that.
yeah. I, yeah, it's something about where we landed with long haul makes me think of this question that's tangential, but it feels connected. Recently, you and I had a conversation about my new arrival to the land of chronic illness after a lifetime of physical disability. We were texting in prep for this event. And you said so kindly and generously, "Welcome to this land, and I'm so sorry you're here." And I think that how it's tangentially connected to changing the world and the long haul world, the long haul work of that change, that I know this is something you probably said to dozens and dozens and dozens of disabled and chronically ill people in different contexts over the decades, part of long haul work, kind of this welcoming of people as they enter a new piece of something in their lives. And so you kindly and generously said, "Welcome to this land of chronic illness," and then "so sorry you're here." You hold both this welcome and this regret so persistently and powerfully in your poems. Can you say more about holding both? What are the barriers? What did the two, when did the two feel like a balance? And when did they feel like a tug of war? Or maybe their relationship is something else entirely.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. I mean, chronic illness is disability often, not always, but many people are disabled by chronic illness. Um, and unlike some other kinds of disability, I think chronic illness is harder to celebrate or to claim or to reclaim because it is very lonely and very defined by suffering, um, by pain, by fatigue, by other symptoms that are very unpleasant to experience. And as someone who's been chronically ill most of my life and, non-normatively bodied my whole life because I have a genetic condition. So even when I didn't know my diagnosis or claim it as something, even as a very young child, I was like, why are you so tired? Why are you always sick? Um, I can't imagine my life without chronic illness, so in that sense, it's my identity. But I don't like it. I'm not, I have disability pride, but I don't have chronic illness pride. But if my disability is a chronic illness, then what am I doing? And in one of the poems I didn't read, the first poem in the book, um, which is called "The Hospital," I talk about how um, when I'm at the hospital getting treatment or in the emergency room, people in the wider world are like, "Oh my gosh, you're at the hospital. Do you need anything?" But actually, often I I have to be at a certain level of function to even go to the hospital. Like often I'm worse when I'm at home than when I'm at the hospital. And then it's thinking about how home becomes the hospital and hospital is the home and these things are merged, and how do you make a home in the place that you really don't want to be, but nevertheless it's your home, and that is your body or your body mind. And so I'm saying to you, Eli, welcome to my home because you are my guest and my kin, and we are now sharing this intimate space of chronic illness, but like also I'm sorry because my home sucks. Like I yeah, I yeah, like um everyone's doing laugh reacts. Like I don't think I'm being that articulate or that yeah. I
Well, and that it feels like that contradiction, that set of tensions is something that disability art is very good at holding.
mhm. Yes, I think more than theory. I think what's interesting is with all the disability studies work that's out, amazing. It used to be like there were only 10 books, so I could have read them, I knew them all really well. And now, I can't possibly keep up with all the new work. There's such amazing work in disability studies, writ large. And yet, there is still a real inability for the most part to really theorize chronic illness the way that disability is theorized so thoroughly. And our accounts of chronic illness always revert to the autobiographical. And that's including in my own writing. And I think that that is something I'm sort of trying to figure out. And my best way of thinking about it is that art and specifically poetry and creative writing and autobiography and visual art and film are all more able to capture and convey and articulate not just the chronic illness experience, but the social construction of chronic illness versus what, for whatever reason, disability studies can't quite figure out how to do that academically.
Right. And I want to say, as someone who's always been rooted in community and grassroots stuff, for whom theory isn't so accessible because the language of theory is often over my head, and when it's not over my head, I'm often like, why do we need this? If for me, and this is going to sound grouchy and rabble-rousing, and it's both of those things, is we can't afford theory that doesn't somehow impact the material and social conditions of the world and our lives. We can't afford it,
No,
and
I
we've
yeah.
never been able to afford it. Um,
I entirely agree, but I also firmly believe that we do need theory, the theories which do help us explain and understand and change the material and social conditions of our world. And when like the work of Audre Lorde is theory, right? Is the kind of theory that I mean. The work of Sin's Invalid is theory in the sense I mean, and I've started in my new book that I'm writing very, very slowly, which is called Sick Time. One of the main things I'm trying to work out is what I call lyric theory, and you are one of my
mm,
prime examples
mm.
of
Mm,
practitioners of lyric theory,
mm,
Eli. But going
mm.
all the way back to, Audre Lorde is one of the biggest, kind of founding or central figures in how I'm thinking about this. And, poetry is theory and theory is poetry is kind of where I am on this. Yeah.
Right. And I so resist that because theory is so shaped in academic ways as inaccessible as these ideas repurposed from grassroots community into this high,
Mm,
specific, siloed language, which then gets shared among theorists, and the
mhm.
rest of us have no entry in. I hear you redefining theory. I hear you wanting to take theory back from those places, and yet for me, it's those places still exist. Those
Yeah,
places exist every time I walk onto the campus.
I mean,
Like
that's fair.
I, I still every time I'm at an academic gathering where my work is being used, I worry about being asked a question that I don't understand, that I have no way into the conversation about my own work. And of course, I have learned to turn those questions inside out and do something else with them as kind of a big FU. But so, yes, I agree. Yes to Audre Lorde. Yes to Sharia Moraga. Yes to Barbara Smith. Yes to Cheryl Clark. Yes to Adrian Rich. Yes to Trudy Graham. That's the tradition of writing I come from. But this redefinition of their work as theory, I get caught on that piece of what it means to be in the academic space and who gets shut out because of high theory.
Yeah, I mean, it's an ongoing conversation. I feel like we
Right,
agree for the most part about what we're
right,
saying. It's just like, what do we
right,
call it? And,
right,
I mean, I'm just going to say, as someone who, was until recently a tenured professor and, spent most of my adult life in the academia, I also would not understand questions. Like I also, and it
right,
infuriates me. It infuriates me the investment in opaque language and
right,
concepts and I think it does influence, did not leave the academy by choice. I got too sick to keep my job, and I'm on disability for the rest of my life. As I call myself too disabled for disability studies now. And so, there's a lot. I didn't choose to leave. I miss it. I miss a lot of things about it terribly. However, it has given me more freedom to do things like write this little poetry chapbook and
right,
and
right,
I mean I've published two books of poetry since I left the academy. I'm like, I'm out of here, guys. And now I'll write haiku, right?
right,
I don't have to
right,
write uh
right.
work with high theory anymore. So,
So let me ask you another question
yeah.
that focuses on your writing, on your creative writing, particularly. How does disability and chronic illness and the material and social conditions of ableism shape your writing? I mean, your content, themes, images, of course, but I also mean your writerly process,
Hmm.
your aesthetics,
Hmm.
your poetics. And I never know exactly what that word poetics means. I think I mean your approach to poetry.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's quite profound because I have such severe vertigo and migraines most of the time that it's very, my writing is much more fragmentary. I just can't do, oh, 15, okay. I can't do the kind of research-based writing I used to do, or even, long creative prose. I write flash, which means like very short creative nonfiction. I write poems, and my book before this, Hypermobilities, was all haiku that I wrote in my head during medical procedures, and that's why they were haiku, because that way I could retain these tiny poems in my head while I was in an MRI machine. So pretty profoundly, it shapes my writing pretty profoundly. Emily just reminded us that we're running short on time. I wanted to ask you the same question, but I kind of think we should move to the audience questions.
Yes. Yes, I
Yeah,
agree. There's no surprise, Ellen, that we get talking and
I
here
know.
we are losing track of time. Like it's not been the first time that happened.
Well, your friendship shows through, and it's all a good problem to have if there's too much chemistry and too much to talk about, because this be one of many. Someone said the imagery and connection with the natural world is so vivid in these works. How does that natural world inform your perspective on your disabilities?
I I can go
Yeah.
first if that works for you, Ellen.
Yes.
Um, so growing up as a physically disabled little kid with a very obvious different kind of body, shaky, slurry, spastic, slow body, where I was getting grief every day, hourly sometimes getting grief for my body and believed it was all my fault. This was long before I had language, had concept, had framework, and I believed all of it, all the everything was my fault. And I took refuge among the trees and on the beaches. That was my place of refuge. And I learned from trees that bodies didn't all have to be symmetrical, and that bodies could be crooked, and bodies could be ugly and completely entrancing. And so within the natural world that I found refuge, that I found solace, that I found bodies like my own. And so I have always been connected to the more than human world for lots of reasons, and one of them is because there was space there to be disabled. And that, so those themes come and find me again and again and again in my writing. You're muted right
I know,
now.
I'm sorry. Coming from, a very different embodied experience and social embodied experience, yet I also feel very similarly. The first thing that came to my mind with this question was like, I'm crooked like a crooked branch, and when we have a tree in our yard that half of it has fallen off in a storm and the other half remains, and I see the persistence of that tree, I feel that persistence in my body and my body's survival, when so many parts of it are failing. And that helps me, find uh, the parts in me that I can still hold on to. And I often feel a very permeable boundary between myself and my body and the natural world. I often feel like I am the plant, or I am the fruit. I am curled up in the dirt when I'm curled up in my bed. So, yeah.
Let's move on to another one. Someone says, I see a lot of poems about love in our community. When I read them, they make me feel hopeful about love in my life now and love in my future. However, I still struggle to accept the love I receive as real. I can't even feel it in my body most of the time. What advice do either of you have on accepting love in your life when you struggle to accept that you can receive it?
Mm. think read anything that Eli has written about his partner. You've just written, some of the most beautiful work out there about, you know, learning to accept love and to have love um, as a disabled person. So that's my short answer.
Well, thank you for that plug, Ellen. Um, God, it's such a. I want to start by saying it's such a tender and real question. And thank you so much for asking that tender and real question. How do we accept love? How do we believe love? How do we then take that love and what do we do with that love? Those are real questions in a world that crushes love in so many ways. The way that shame about our body minds crushes love, the way that the social and material conditions of white supremacy and settler colonialism and capitalism and fat phobia and ableism and xenophobia and on and on and on all crush love, crush love. Disposability culture makes us believe that we're worthless, that we're not worth loving, that why would anyone love us? And advice that this is a process. I don't believe there's an end to the process. That this process is of believing we're lovable and finding the love and receiving the love, I think is an ongoing process. And it's ongoing partly because the forces that want us to believe us being disabled people and fat people and trans people and queer people and women and black and brown and indigenous people, the we being lots of people, the forces that want us to believe that we're worthless and disposable and unlovable are daily and continuous. And so the work of resistance, the work of knowing that we are worthy of love, that we are lovable, that love is important needs to also be ongoing work.
That was a beautiful answer for such a beautiful question. I'm just really grateful that our conversation went there. Um, this is a comment, but one that's, I think, really interesting that might engage you both as a question from your friend Corbett, Corbett, who got a earlier mention. Um, said, as for the ignoring of chronic illness within disability studies and theories, I find it really related to the ways that academic disability spaces ignore the realities of disabled bodies, as seen in how the paths to academic jobs and conference participation require having minimal access needs, particularly around being able to be upright and functional for hours on ends. So the conversations miss our more disabled bodies. And I'm going to bring in another question that is related to that. Max shared appreciating the criticisms of academia as a person on SSI who had to drop out of college because of my health. Any advice for people in my position or similar ones on navigating writing books? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you both, and shout out to Corbett, without whom I surely would not be here because her work um, as a disability activism and disability studies elder is so foundational. Um, yeah, I mean, disability studies takes place within the academy, and the academy is an ableist structure as well as, a racist and colonialist and capitalist structure. And so, th- well, the ADA in the United States, the Americans with Disabilities Act, has opened up uh, much more access through accommodations um, within the academy. There's still, profound ways that people who are more disabled in certain ways are excluded. And like I mentioned, I was not able to keep my job. And I will say that my former employer gave me every accommodation I asked for. I mean, part of my privilege as a professor in the position I was as a tenured professor is that I got a lot of accommodations. But it goes deeper to the definition of like what do you do in the academy? Like what is valued work? And if you're not able to engage in certain kinds of work, then you're excluded. And I think what disability studies always has to reckon with is that the vast majority of disabled people in the United States and in the world do not have access to the academy, right? So, like, it's only a very tiny privileged group of people doing disability studies, and that always has to be kept in mind and addressed very intentionally. As far as writing books, as a disabled person, I think it is really hard for anyone to write a book. And there's a lot of structures to support people in writing books, and now even to support disabled people. I want to give a shout out to the new publication, Nerve to Write, which is centered on creative writing for disabled and neurodivergent people. Um, I think you write at your own pace and you find your peers, whether online or in person. Everyone has to have people who read their work and give honest feedback. And you don't be afraid to try to publish stuff. And if the best way to share your stuff is some kind of self-publication, do it. Because the most important thing is to get your writing out there. And one of the ironic, oppressive freedoms of being on disability is that we're not allowed to make money. And so there isn't that pressure to sell our writing in the same way, which I think is not an ideal situation, but it does mean, put your writing out yourself. Um, Speaking of which, it looks like Emily is plugging our books in the chat now.
I was
How
like,
to
well,
buy our
that's
books.
a reminder.
Speaking of not
Thank you.
making money, buy my poetry book. I'm not speaking, yeah.
Absolutely. So I've shared the links for how to access these books. If you're not able to access the chat and you want to send an email to access@disabilityculturalcenter.org, we'll make sure you get these links that way as well. I have one more question I'd love to get us to, and then if we can just make sure to leave the last 2 minutes. So we'll do a quick round. Both of your work often ponders humanity, how expansive the definition of humanity can be, and how it can be reclaimed by disabled people. How do you think this exploration of identity proceeds differently for people who don't feel human or don't want to be human?
Eli, you want to take this?
Yeah, I can. So, not feeling human comes from so many places. Um, it makes me think of those of us who depend on lots of different kinds of technology and think about ourselves as cyborgs or not even cyborgs, but our bodies include wheelchairs, our bodies include our heating pads, our bodies include all kinds of adaptive devices we use. I think about those of us who feel really porous with the more than human world, and I'm one of them who trees and rocks are companions who talk to me. Um, I think of all the social and material reasons that disabled people, particularly black and brown disabled people, have been told again and again that they're not human, that they're non-human somehow. So I think of those material and social reasons of not feeling human. And then I think of folks whose identities aren't like I'm not really human. And I think that um space for all of those permutations and all of that porous and all the lines that as humans, particularly those of us who are white and men and straight and cis and rich, want to draw lines, want to create these categories that defines who is who, define sentient and non-sentient, define human and non-human, define, and how those categories, every category we create as humans, there's going to be beings that exist on those lines, beings that for whom the categories don't work. And at best, we need to create categories that are really porous, that bend and shift with the beings we're categorizing rather than categories becoming social control. So we're asking beings to bend to the categories. And in other places, I think the categories simply need to go to be gone. And I wonder what this conversation about being human and not being human would look like without those categories and certainly without categories of social control.
Well, on that note, I know I could listen to you two for many more hours. I've really enjoyed our time together today, and I know from the incredible questions that got asked and the number of hearts that zoomed up across the stream as screen, I am not alone. But I'm going to wrap us up. Thank you all for being here. Thank you so much to our speakers and our access team. If you want to keep this conversation going, you can join our Discord at dcc.page/Discord. Maybe you're going to write some poetry after today, and that's a place where you can share it or connect with others. We have a bunch of upcoming events from a cozy reading night tomorrow at the DCC with some virtual conversation about it on our Discord to a book reading and performance with Galen Lee on Tuesday and a whole lot more. So we're dropping the link in to our link tree in the chat. That's dcc.page/links. Once again, this program was brought to you by the San Francisco Disability Cultural Center. We are led by Elsie and Lily Cox Haven of Hope. And it's all made possible thanks to the generous funds we get from the City of San Francisco's Human Service Agency's Department of Disability and Aging Services. So thank you all so much and have a great evening and afternoon, wherever you may be.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you to everyone who's been here. Thank you to the DCC. Thank you to Ellen. Just thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Eli. Thank you to the interpreters and the captioners. And thank you to the audience, everyone. We love you. I'm sorry I couldn't see your faces, but just so much love out to everyone today. Thanks.